Fantasy Flight just published the newest Rules Reference Guide 1.5, and I'm here to talk about some of the changes to Marvel Champions. Hello and welcome to Nelson Oliver Cards. Today we are diving in and taking a look at some of the changes and erratas that came about in the new Rules Reference Guide that was published yesterday, whenever this video came out. Recently. The Rules Reference Guide is an excellent document where you can go and take a look at very niche situations as well as broad gameplay questions or things that arise, and they do updates to this Rules Reference Guide every so often. The last one had some pretty big defense ruling updates. This one does not have a huge number of bombshell new rules, but it is so very well laid out. There are some changes. It's not that nothing in the game changed. There are some changes, all of which I think are really, really healthy for the game. And so we'll talk through some of that, and we're going to talk through the erratas. I'm going to go over kind of some of the bigger points, because there's 65 pages of those documents, and I think every single page was changed. So I'm not going to sit here and read through the entire document. If you want to do that, I welcome you to do so. That's going to be linked down below to the 1.6 Rules Reference Guide. You can check it out there. But I'm going to talk about kind of the bigger ones and some of the erratas to some of the cards that came out. And I'm going to try and put time links in the description below so you can hop around and see exactly what you came to this video to check out. I will start off by saying, I kind of alluded to it earlier, there's not a huge amount of change that's going on in the game, which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing. I think the game is in a really good spot, and a lot of the things that were added to the rules reference update are clarifications, putting things in an easy place. There's been a lot of discussion on the Discord, which I highly recommend that you join, talking about how nice this is as a document now. I mean, if you want to go figure something out, if you look up Interrupt, it's going to have exactly what you need or tell you where to find it. And it's a document that is just so nice. It is so beautiful, and there's been a lot of really cool additions, not necessarily changes to rules, but timing and setup. Has a nice flowchart now, and it's good. We'll talk about a little bit more of that as well. There have been a lot of rule clarifications or updates that have been already noted on Hall of Heroes. So if you follow Hall of Heroes, and when people will send in questions, they'll get answers and post them to that website. A lot of those rules have been codified at this point in the Rules Reference Guide 1.5. And so if I'm talking about something, you're like, I thought that was already, a thing. It probably was, but now it's legit in the rulebook. That being said, we're going to start this video talking about the rules updates, so specific overarching game narrative rules, and then at the end of the video, we're going to talk about some of the cards that got updated, some of the erratas and implications that arise from those updates. So let's just get into it. The biggest change, I think, and this is kind of what they led off with in the article that they posted, is they are changing the rule that something, in order to carry out an action, it must change the game state. That's what it was previous to 1.5, is in order to do something, it needed to change the game state in some sort of fashion. And it was a confusing rule. I'm not gonna like that. What does that mean? What does changing the game state mean? And so they changed it to, in order to carry out an action, you must have a valid target for that action, which makes way more sense. It's a rule that was confusing, and now this is pretty easy to say. It's like, hey, I want to thwart a scheme. You cannot thwart a scheme unless there's a scheme with one thwart on it. It seems really intuitive, but it takes away the ambiguity of what does change the game state mean. And now we're talking about, can you carry out an action? Yes, if there's a valid target. I gave the example of thwarting the scheme if there's only one threat on it. You can't play Relentless Assault if there's not a minion in play, because Relentless Assault says deal 5 damage to a minion. There's a whole section on page 35 of the document that is linked below about what targets are, and I will say, you can read that. It is very helpful. It's very good information. But also, if you think it's a target, it probably is a target. And so it's just going to be a way more clear way of explaining, saying, can you do this? Yes, because there's a valid target. The one thing that I will say about this, and it's the exception to the rule, are status cards. So if there is not a scheme with threat on it you cannot thwart unless you are confused. This is the caveat, and I think it's a good mechanical caveat, but it is for some reason it's just a weird to have a caveat for me. But so if you are confused, there's no threat on the scheme, you can make a basic activation or play a thwart event as long as you are confused. Now this is not actually where you would expect to find it in the RG. It's under the confused or stunned status effect conditions. So with that being said, we may get some more clarification around that at some point, but at this point, you have to have a valid target to carry out any action or basic activation unless you have a status card. In that case, you do not have to have a valid target for that status card. So you can clear the area with no threat on the main scheme, no threat on any side schemes, and it will remove the confused status card. Makes sense, but it's also just a little bit of a discrepancy, but I wanted to point that out. What's really cool about this is that it has some implications for a couple of different cards. Now there are a ton of them out there. Like now, a 0 cost get over here is a great stun. It's a great stun remover, right? You do not have to have a minion in order to play get over here now. 0 cost, remove your stun. But my favorite one, and this is not my idea, I found this on Discord and I really should have looked at it, who said it. But She-Hulk, her superhuman strength ability, she gets +2 attack, and she has a forced response that states after she attacks a target, discard superhuman strength and stun the attack target. Now, with these new rules and the implication of needing a valid target, if she attacks a target that is already stunned, she cannot trigger the forced response of her card, and she gets to maintain that card. So now this to me is just like, I really want to make a video of this and have, maybe a two-handed play and just have a stun lock and have She-Hulk have her superhuman streaks out there and just hit that stun villain or minion or whatever. It just seems like a lot of fun. But those are kind of some of the implications or cards that have a good, I don't really think there are really any negative implications when it comes to talking about this rule, but this was kind of the big one, which as a technical nerdy, I want to figure out the rules, it has implications, but it just kind of makes more sense for what they were trying to say, and so I'm all about this one. One of the other big ones that they changed were the setup steps, and this is all outlined on page 43 in a beautiful numbered sequential thing, and it just works so well. Some of the main changes of setup is that permanent cards are removed at the beginning of setup, set outside out of play, and then your setup will pull them from outside out of play. We'll talk about permanent here a little bit, but it removes all of the ambiguity around like Wolverine's claws, and if you mulligan into them. Now at this point, the way that the rules are set up is you are not able to mulligan or ever draw into your permanent cards, and so it takes away all of that, stress of, am I going to draw the claws, or the claws going to be taken as a drone if I'm playing Ultron, and all of that kind of stuff. Done. Which makes a lot of sense, and it's perfect, it's good, everything is good with permanents. The other kind of big change for the setup is that now obligations are shuffled into the encounter deck before you resolve any of the when revealed or main scheme setup abilities. And so all of those videos that I just made talking about putting your obligations outside, doing all the when revealed, that's all null and void now. Obligations go in there. Now you can discard your obligation when you're discarding for a spell in Ebony Maw, all of that good stuff. Obligations start in the deck, which also kind of makes sense to me. It was a weird thing to do all your setup and then put them in. So all of these kind of just feel like they make sense and they work. So good on the setup stuff. So now permanent cards are set aside out of play, out of the deck, out of everything at step 1 of setup. And then whenever you resolve your character setup later after you've resolved your mulligans, you can pull them from that out of play area. And so the same situation that I was just talking about, you're not going to lose them to drones, the collector's not going to take your claws, they're not going to take Spectrum's energy forms. All of those are going to start out of play. Makes total sense. Permanent comes in, can't be messed with. You can always have them on the table. And then the other thing we got clarification around is that permanent cards do not count towards your deck size. And so that was one of the questions, that we've been kind of wondering about, is Spectrum has her 18 cards because she has her 3 forms as well as the 15 cards. They are permanent, but they come in out of your deck, technically, all of this stuff. And so it's like, do you have to run a 43 card deck? Can you run a 53 card deck? Regardless, all of those questions have been answered. Permanent cards do not count towards your deck size, so you have to run a 40 card deck after you've subtracted out the numbered cards that are permanent. Good stuff. Everything makes sense. That's what I like about this update, is there's nothing that's like, that's kind of weird. Everything feels like it makes sense and feels like they are making it so that it should be the way it is. One of the things that I put this on this list to talk about because this may be common knowledge or not. It was marked as a change in the 1.5 update, but it's around choosing. I've always grim ruled it that you need to choose something that you can do the most of, and now that's official. If you are presented with two options and you cannot do one of the options to totality, you must choose the other option. So in a hypothetical situation, if you need to discard 5 cards or take 3 damage, and you only have 4 cards in your hand, you have to take the 3 damage. So you can't discard 4 and say, hey, I fulfilled this. And so it makes a lot of sense. And then if there is ever a situation where you cannot perform any of the options, you have to choose the one where you can fulfill the most. Typically, the encounter cards are bad, and they're forcing you to do bad things. And so this one makes a lot of sense. It hurts a little bit because we don't have as much flexibility, which I guess like I was always doing that anyways. But yeah, you have to take the option that you can most fulfill, or if not, fulfill in totality. This is not a rules change, but I did want to call it out just because it is a beautiful reference, and that is the timing chart, which can be found on page 5 of the rules reference guide. And it just talks through the timing of everything. There's not any changes, but it does talk through exactly how it is. I will walk through it just because sometimes it's nice to hear it talked about a little bit, but D20 and I were joking on the Discord that we're going to print it out or paint it on our wall because it's like, this solves so many problems to just have this flowchart. And so at the top, the first thing that you check are constant abilities, keywords, and icons. So amplify icons, constant abilities like quick strike or any of those, toughness, anything like that. Those are constant abilities. Those have priority. Then it goes into status cards. So your tough, confuse, stun. Goes into forced interrupt, boost, when defeated, and when revealed effects. Then we go into force responses, and then consequential damage. So this is pretty funny because I was playing a game earlier. It's actually set up right here on the table, which you can't see, but where I had Iron Man I was Voltroning Iron Man. I had all of the upgrades on him, and the question came out. It's like, okay, does Power Gloves take place before or after the consequential damage is dealt to Iron Man? Because Power Gloves state that after the attached ally makes a attack or thwart, deal 1 damage to an enemy. And so I was curious, so like, okay, like, does the Power Glove trigger? Do I get to deal the damage, or does the last consequential knock Iron Man out, and therefore I don't actually get to trigger the Power Gloves? Turns out, consequential damage after the response. This is a response, so you get to trigger the response. Deal the consequential damage. Iron Man's done, but you still get the Power Gloves. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm in game, and I'm like, okay, how does this work? This timing chart solves so many problems, and this one, if nothing else, look at this chart on page 5, and I think it's going to solve a significant number of questions that you will have in your Champions games. Now, there are a ton of rules updates. Those are kind of the big ones that I wanted to talk about. That being said, there probably are big ones that I have missed or have not interacted with, so please, please, please talk about them in the comments. I want this to be a reference for people when they come. They can watch the video, but also if there's some big implication of something that I missed, and there probably is, honestly, put it in the comments. People can read through those and kind of get an understanding of some of the changes in this game. Again, a lot of the changes are not either big changes or they are changes for good / that makes sense. So please let me know in the comments some of the changes that you think are interesting, or some of them that I missed, because I would love to talk with you about those. We're going to move into the part of the video where we're talking about erratas. So this is a little bit different. So we're not changing rules. We are changing specific cards. Cards are getting updated. Cards are changing and doing different things now. A lot of these are bad. Not bad, but they are not in the player's favor. And so Cosmo, for instance, got a pretty big nerf. Unfortunately, our good boy can only now interact with the player or the encounter deck. Makes a ton of sense. The 2-cost ally was so freaking good in a couple of scenarios as well as with Strange. And so you cannot pull that cheese of, cycling the Infinity Gauntlet, always knowing what that top card is. So Cosmo would never take indirect or consequential damage. Red Skull with the side schemes. The biggest offender would be Strange's Invocation deck. You can't use Cosmo to cycle that deck anymore. A very, very healthy change, I think. Sad, but healthy. So now you have to figure out a way to either know or take a random guess on that top card of the encounter or your player deck. And so Cosmo's so good, right? You can run them in like the shield build with the global logistics. Heimdall helps you understand what cards are coming. So I mean, like there's still cool interactions, but probably the biggest nerf to Strange if he needed one, right? He's still going to be S tier. He's still the best character in the game. But now you can't use Cosmo to be a second Wong for you. The next errata that we talked about is one that they fixed almost immediately day of printing, and that's on James Rhodes, the War Machine hero. James Rhodes, the alter ego ally. He has the ability where he can shuffle a War Machine back into his deck. The way that it's printed, it's not limited to once per phase, once per round, whatever. You could take 15 War Machine cards and shuffle them back into your deck. It was errata, so now that it does read, it is now once per phase. So, yep, we knew that one was coming, but that's a big one. Steel Fist from Colossus has now removed the cost arrow, so there's a little confusion around how Steel Fist kind of worked, because dealing 5 damage was before the cost, so did you have to deal you couldn't deal 4 damage and then not trigger it? But basically that has been errated, so Steel Fist now reads that you deal 5 damage and then you may discard a tough status card to stun and confuse an enemy. Makes a lot of sense. Real good stuff. I like it. For Wolverine, we kind of already talked about this when we were working through our permanent stuff, but his alter ego says just now put his claws into play instead of search your deck and discard pile, because now those claws are in that out of play nebulous area. You can't put them into play, but now Logan just states put his claws into play, so we're good there. And then probably not the biggest, but what is going to be my bridge into the biggest change, in my opinion. Miss Marvel from the Nova pack, Nova's signature ally, now states that you can exhaust her, deal her a damage, and return an event that you played from your discard pile to your hand, not one that you just played. Which doesn't sound like a big deal, and it sounds pretty obvious, but that's because you can no longer target cards that are removed from the game. And so Miss Marvel couldn't grab a card that's being removed from the game, which leads me into that thing that I was teasing, and the biggest change and the biggest nerf is Go for Champions. Now, Go for Champions states that you can play this card and champions cannot take damage until the end of the round. It has been updated so that now Go for Champions, after you play it, is removed from the game. So Miss Marvel can't recur this, and a higher player count game, Go for Champions was just dumb. Like, you could pretty much win almost any scenario if you had 4 champions, each one of you running it. There really wasn't a stop to it. And so now you have to play it, you have to remove it from the game. It makes sense. It makes it a little bit harder to play or include in my decks now, because you have to have it at the right time in the right place, which is totally fair. But you can't just play it every turn. I get that. But now I'm like, okay, if we're coming into this big turn, am I holding on to Go for Champions? Am I hoping to draw into it? Am I finding a way to stash it somewhere or to draw it? It makes it harder to include. I think at this point it's more difficult to include in a lot of my decks, whereas I was including it in every single one of my decks, which is kind of where I want it to be. I'd rather it be on the, I may not include this card this is a 16th hero card. I am always including this card. So, good stuff there. I kind of lied to you all. I am going to end on the most impactful update in the entire 56-page document. And that is, MODOK now has periods in his card title. And so that I think changes the game pretty significantly for me. I'm here. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I just thought that was fun. There's a ton of erratas and changes to cards. Some of them are adding periods. Some of them are changing costs. There are updates, there are references, there are examples. It's a very, very good document, and I highly recommend, if you have the time or if you have the desire to read through it, you should, because it's very well laid out and you'll find the answers to a lot of the questions. Even if you don't read through it page to page, it's 56 pages, it's pretty dense, that's fine. If you have a question, if you're curious about stun, go to stun. There, it's all alphabetized. You can go to S, find stun. It's like an encyclopedia. You can read exactly, and the answer is probably in there now. It's a really good document. Highly recommend like bookmarking it or having it somewhere, because it's a complex game and they did a really good job in making sure that a lot of the questions that we have are now easily answered. I think it's a really healthy thing for the game to have, and I'm very happy with the changes, and I wanted to kind of appreciate the FFG team for caring enough about this game to continue to support it in this way. Now, FFG could easily say, you know what, we're just going to continue printing cards, people will buy them, we'll be happy with that, but you can tell that there is a passion of this game from the designers where they're spending time and updating rules reference guides for us so that we can have a longevity of a game. And that just goes so very far, and I appreciate that, and I hope that you all help share that appreciation to the designers. So all that being said, I'm very happy. If you have any questions, or like I was saying, if there's something that I missed that really should have talked about, please let me know in the comments below, and we will discuss and talk and experience it. It's been a fun day. It's been crazy trying to figure out all the new interactions. There's going to be more coming out in the next days, weeks, months, years. It's going to be good. But until then, I will talk to you all later. See you around. Peace.